You're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
And welcome back to the program. Joining me now, Representative Aaron Pilkington, Republican of Knoxville, Representative Ashley Hudson, Democrat of Little Rock. They are part of the Future Caucus. I think there's 32 members of the Arkansas legislature that are part of the Future Caucus now, which means they're in the millennial or the Gen Z generation, right?
Yes, sir. So it's all members who are 45 and under. We've got one of actually the largest delegations in the country, which is an exciting thing. And now we've added two more members who are Gen Z, so it's not just millennial. We had to actually rebrand from Millennial Action Project to Future Caucus to include them. So we're excited. It's a big crew.
What does it involve when you guys aren't in session in terms of just what you do to kind of collaborate as a caucus?
So, one of the things that we try to make sure that we do here locally is to get together with other members of our Future Caucus for social events or for brainstorming sessions, but there's also a really active national network of members of the Future Caucus from legislatures across the country. And so these are Republicans and Democrats who fall into this demographic, who are really committed to and focused on working on bipartisan solutions to everyday problems. So we leave all the partisanship at the door, we leave all the bickering at the door, and we try to roll our sleeves up and work together to solve the problems that face our generations.
Well, we'll talk about some of those problems here, but I bet you I can find some areas where y'all disagree on a few things.
No.
Let's start first with Governor Sanders' agenda in the State of Address. She actually brought up quite a few things in there. I thought it was a pretty meaty speech, to be honest with you. Surprised me on a few things that she went in there. I think you'll find some bipartisanship on eliminating the grocery tax. I think Republicans and Democrats want to do that. I'm still unclear as to how it's going to get eliminated. I think it's a constitutional amendment, but the governor has told me she thinks she can circumvent the Constitution on that. What's your thoughts on how it's going to get eliminated?
Yeah, that was when we initially talked about it, a lot of people kind of brought that up. And so my understanding is in working with the AG's office is finding a way to basically turn the rate to zero. So maybe, the actual mechanism tax is still there, but the rate is zero. So, that way you're eliminating. Yeah, it's kind of a creative way to do it, and that's a way the legislature can act without getting ourselves any sort of constitutional hot water.
All right, she brought up a lot of changes to higher education. The most controversial, but probably the smallest part of it is this wanting to end woke indoctrination and take on professors, even tenured professors. Obviously, that's a tricky subject to kind of navigate there. Ashley, you're an attorney, and you've even probably done a little bit on the civil rights front there. So what?
Sure, don't ask me about the grocery tax.
Well, you're for eliminating the grocery tax.
Well, sure. But now, I think that whenever you're talking about anybody's First Amendment rights, you're walking into some really tricky areas. And especially this idea in Arkansas, of all places, that we have woke professors who are out there indoctrinating kids at our state universities. I think it's a fun talking point, I guess, if you're trying to appeal to the right. But I think that the reality is that sometimes people have their kids go out into the world, and perhaps those kids have not been exposed to different ideas, and they are challenged on the ideas that they do have about politics and culture and life in general. And they discover new things. And sometimes that means that they come back and they have a different perspective than their parents on things. And it turns out that a lot of people, I guess, don't like that. Now, do we punish the professors for giving them those ideas any more than we would punish a professor for espousing a right-wing idea? I think that we're talking about a proverbial slippery slope on First Amendment rights when we start talking about the government actually coming up with legislation that censors the rights of these professors to have these conversations with the kids in their class. And let's not forget, too, these kids are 18 and over. Yeah. So these are legal adults who are having these conversations with other adults.
Do you think a law can be written that walks this tightrope?
I think there is. I haven't seen the actual language on this legislation, so it's really hard to tell exactly what the nuts and bolts looks like in ending that. I think, the reality is for a lot of us Republicans, we want to make sure that our institutions, or especially our state-sponsored institutions, are focusing on, helping kids learn. It's not this idea that we're just sending them away to a daycare that's basically becomes a social activist community. We want them to be there learning. And so I just think the idea is we want to make sure that our administrators and our teachers are focused on educating and But like I said, I need to see the actual language on what it says, because right now I haven't seen a draft of what this really looks like. So it's kind of hard to speculate what would be, to represent Hudson's point.
The governor in a sit down with me late in the week said that her office gets calls regularly about concerns like this, and I don't know if it's, again, exposing people to something for the first time, or if it is something that is more, I guess, devious in nature, sort of.
I feel strongly that this is a solution in search of a problem. I mean, just because someone has called, the statement that you're referring to is really vague as to whether or not it was someone's firsthand knowledge that it was a problem, or if they heard from their neighbor that it was a problem, or if someone investigated and determined that it actually was a problem. So unless there's some sort of concrete problem, and when we're talking about legislation, I would say that the problem has to be more than an isolated incident where a professor did something that made one person uncomfortable or angry, or let's say, did cross a line in some way. Yeah. The solution to that problem is terminating the professor. The solution is not legislating a problem and creating a First Amendment crisis for the state.
Yeah. In the essence of time and moving on here, let's talk about some other things in higher education. The formula for funding higher education institutions likely to come under some scrutiny here. More of a focus perhaps on workforce development versus wherever it is now, which it's a complicated formula. I don't understand. Yes. What do you hope changes in terms of funding and the formula for funding higher education?
Well, as you know, I represent the River Valley, so we have a lot of Arkansas Tech grads. The way we've always felt like the formula has always been, let's say, skewed not towards in favor of Arkansas Tech. And so one of the things I want to make sure is, as we go through and as we rework this formula, to make sure that they get an equitable share of funding. And so that's something for me personally that I'm going to be looking out for my constituents, because it's been an issue for a long time. Senator Brian Davis has brought it up multiple times, and so we just want to make sure that all across the state that the funding is, for lack of a better word, equitable towards our different institutions.
Yeah. See, equity's not bad.
You used to feel the same way?
Yeah, I do.
I'll change the word to fair.
No, I do. I think that, I feel strongly that we can focus a lot more on these technical educational facilities like Pulaski Tech and some of the other wonderful facilities that we have throughout the state. We have a workforce issue in Arkansas. We have a lot of jobs available to people who have the skills to do them. And I think that having a focus on enhancing those skills and enhancing that workforce is a good thing. I also think, though, that when we're talking about how we look at higher education, how we fund it, we really need to take a look at how we're prioritizing Arkansas students. There's been a real focus over the past few years on funding higher education in a way that takes away from the opportunities for Arkansas students, sometimes in lieu of trying to attract students from out of state in order to bring them in instead. And I'd really like to see something when we start talking about reworking the formula to ensure that we're prioritizing Arkansas students and making sure that we're keeping talent here in state.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but also unemployment's really low in Arkansas, and we're going to need some in-migration to fill some of these job openings that are out there. I've sensed that there's bipartisanship from legislators I've talked to on banning cell phones in schools. This is a K through 12 issue.
Not for my teenager. My teenager is not into this.
Who can't vote yet. Yeah. So exactly. But I have heard from legislators on both sides of the aisle. They think that this is a good thing, that it's at least worth exploring in a bigger way. There's been some pilot programs out there. Aaron, I'll let you go first again.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. Obviously, the pilot program got announced over the summer, and there was a lot of talk about it going on. And actually I wasn't really sure how I felt about it when it first came out, but actually I was at the Future Summit, which is hosted by the Future Caucus, and it was interesting to hear these other states talk about the same issue. And I remember one time it was actually two Northeast reps who were discussing the policy back and forth, and they actually, one liked it, one didn't like it. And so it's kind of interesting to sit back and kind of listen to that. And then, of course, actually I went to Canada for an economic development conference, and they had talked about, in Canadian schools, they were looking to ban cell phones. So it's not something that's just something that's happening in Arkansas. I think there's a national discussion about cell phones and kids, and so I'm glad we're leading on it. I've seen some pushback from parents about it and students. But, I think as we think about mental health and doing more on mental health, and just improving our education, we really need to get find a better solution to cell phones in schools, and distracted learning is not good learning. And so we need to do a better job. And I think it may be painful, but I think it's one of those things in 10 years we'll look back and think, why did we ever let them have it in the first place?
Yeah.
So.
Are you going to vote against your daughter? Is that what you're telling me?
You know, I'm really conflicted on this issue. One of my daughters is in one of the schools that has had the pilot program. But, you know, she does use her phone in class for certain things. She has some of the classes where her teachers will have them take out their phones and use it to research something, or, you know, to pull a clip or something in order to help enhance whatever the lesson is for the day. I have heard concerns from some of my constituents, especially because I am in a suburban district, I think, in a city surround, about taking away phones for kids in case of an emergency,
right.
An active shooter.
Or even a health issue.
Yeah, an active shooter, a health issue. The tornadoes, when they came through, a lot of kids were reaching out to parents in order to let them know if they were okay in the aftermath of that. So I think that there's a balance that we're going to have to figure out how to strike in order to make sure that kids have access to a phone or some method of communication with a parent in case of an emergency. But I think in general that the idea that we need to make sure that our kids are less distracted during the day is a discussion worth having.
Yeah. I'm going to let Ashley go first on this next subject here. The governor did talk a little bit about health care. She also has mentioned maternal health, although there wasn't a ton of discussion about that in her State of the State address, but it's coming and you guys are working on it. So what do you want to see happen on the health care front that you feel like is critical that needs to happen?
You know, one thing that I'm concerned about in general, and this isn't necessarily the governor in specific, but I think it affects Arkansas, is Medicaid coverage. I know that there was some discussion about the work requirements, which I think likely with the new administration coming in federally are more likely to be upheld than they have been in the past. However, I am concerned, especially in a state that consistently ranks at the bottom for health outcomes, for longevity, for cancer, smoking, obesity, all of it, that we do anything that would upend the system where people have access to health care. We certainly have a lot of room to grow and to improve our health outcomes. And so I don't want to go backwards in that regard.
The governor told me that AR Home is not going to be repealed. She said that is not something that's on the table for discussion for her. So the Medicaid expansion compared to what we had now, some things may change. You've been very active with filing some bills on health care, Representative Pilkington. Tell me give me two things that you think are critical to have to happen this session.
Well, I think one of the most critical things, obviously, is a 12-month extension on maternal health. It's been an issue.
The governor still opposes, by the way. You got your work cut out.
So what she says is she doesn't. I read Talk Business. I'm an avid reader of Talk Business, and what I think I remember her quote says that she didn't want to pay for double services when there's things existing. And so I've been engaging, working with the governor's office, finding that, obviously I ran special language during the fiscal session to see who was falling through the gaps. And that was really helpful for us because, what gets measured gets changed. We were actually able to see what some people were saying at DHS was, oh no, everyone's getting covered. Come to find out that wasn't the fact and there are people falling through the gaps. So I've been engaged with them to make sure that we are doing it in a fiscally responsible way. I think there's a way to get there, and so we've been working on it. That's why even the bill I filed a month ago is different than the one I filed 2 years ago, and so that's about auto-enrolling into our homes to make sure that we're using that. It's a better match, 9 to 10 instead of the 70-30. So that's one of the things I think is important, and it's just trying to get there so that we are being fiscally responsible because I work in healthcare. I understand the importance of Medicaid. I also understand, my colleagues who are worried about Medicaid spending. And so I do think, we need to make sure that we're judicious in how we do it. But, I remind people too it is way cheaper to do preventative care than it is to have them end up in the ER. And so another one that I'm really passionate about is CGM coverage for gestational diabetes. And so, a lot of issues that we have around cardiovascular issues and around weight with pregnancy, we can actually have some of these high-risk pregnancies not be as high risk if we get these things managed. FDA's approved it. I want us to be the first state that actually does it. It doesn't cost us a lot of money to do it. And once again, it's actually, when you look at it, it's going to be cheaper to do that than to have them show up at the ER and be preeclamptic and have a terrible outcome. So those are some of the things that I want to do. I think that would like to see done this session. I think what I get from talking to my colleagues, and I even get from talking to the governor's office, is we know maternal health is an issue that needs to be fixed. How are we doing that? There's a lot of ideas out there.
Yeah. There's not consensus hasn't really rallied around everything yet. That's why I think we've not seen a bigger push either from the governor's office or from a bigger legislative bloc. You got a lot of independent legislators like yourself out there that are throwing ideas out there, which is good.
Yeah.
That's the process. So.
Yeah, no, I think so. And as we kind of began to, especially now that we have our committees, we have our chairmen, we're coming more together to say, okay, let's lay it out. I know I had a doula bill, but Representative Lee Johnson was working on one, and I said, why don't you let's just use your doula bill instead of mine. And so we're kind of doing a little bit of that handing off right now. And so I'd say it's not in the ether, it's forming, it's just not solidified yet. So.
All right, 60 seconds apiece here. Ashley, you'll go first, Aaron second. I want to take one of your bills that you filed that we haven't talked about yet. I want to know more about caring for caregivers. What are you trying to accomplish there?
Sure. So we have a high veteran population, high retiree population in Arkansas, which means necessarily that we have a very high population of people who, are kind of hidden and taking care of all of these retirees and veterans. That is often a full-time job, and it's often a very expensive and thankless job. So what I was trying to do with this, and I got some of the inspiration from this from my time working with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, who does support and tries to support veteran caregivers. But to try to give some sort of tax credit or tax break to accommodate for some of the expenses associated with caregiving. So there are some specific guide rails built into this. Talks about the types of expenses it can be used for, the types of individuals that you can be caring for in order to qualify for it, and allows for up to $3,000 in tax credits per year for certain types of materials for caregivers in these very specific circumstances.
All right, 60 seconds. I want to hear more about fast-tracking residential housing.
Sure. So
a big problem in Arkansas.
Seriously,
affordable
it is.
housing, getting housing built.
Affordable housing is a big issue here in Arkansas, and I would even say even not just low income, but middle income are also an issue. And that's something I found is talking to some of my mayors and some of our economic developers. They say, I actually need more homes so I can get people in here so that we can increase our workforce. So talking to builders and talking to government officials about what's kind of slows us down to getting this done. The hope is to create kind of like we have opportunity zones on a federal level, creating home improvement zones, and then letting the city say, hey, this is an area of the city we're wanting to develop. We're going to create a zone. We're going to have an area where we can fast track it. You're a reputable builder who we know will do it and do it well. And so the idea is just kind of moving things along, making it easier, making it faster. And if we can do that, we can also help lower the price. And so as housing affordability becomes harder and harder, I think this is a key to help make it easier.
All right, it's good stuff. We'll keep an eye on it. Representative Hudson, Representative Pilkington, thank you both
Thank you.
for being
Thank
here,
you.
and good luck. And I'll probably have you guys back before the session's over. So
Fantastic.
Thanks
All
so
right,
much.
thanks.
Look forward to it.
Appreciate it.
We're back with more right after this.